At my wealthy in-laws' black tie charity gala, I walked in as the unemployed husband they couldn't hide. Smiles tightened, questions turned into knives, and then the sponsor's presentation hit the screens. My stomach dropped because the diagrams looked familiar. My name is Daniel Holt. I'm 38 years old, and I live just outside Raleigh, North Carolina. If you met me at a grocery store or in line at the DMV, you'd probably put me in the quiet, polite, slightly tired category and forget about me 5 minutes later. For most of my life, that was fine. I never needed to be the loudest person in the room. I just wanted to build a stable life, a decent job, a calm home, and the kind of marriage where you can sit in the same room doing different things and still feel like you're on the same team. That part, the marriage, was the one thing I got completely right. My wife Claire is the kind of person who makes strangers feel safe. She remembers names. She sends thank you cards. She shows up early and leaves late. When her friends go through breakups or job losses or family emergencies, they call her first. She's not flashy, but she's strong in a way that doesn't need to announce itself. And she comes from money. Not the private jet every weekend kind of money, but the kind that wraps itself in tradition and influence in words like philanthropy and legacy. Her parents, Martin and Evelyn Wexler, have been fixtures in their social circle for decades. Martin built a financial services firm from the ground up and sold a controlling share years ago, then shifted into boards, committees, and advisory roles. Evelyn runs charity events the way some people run corporations, staff, schedules, sponsors, seating charts, donor lists, and little handwritten notes that somehow make powerful people feel personally seen. When Claire and I first started dating, I thought her family would be intimidating in a standard way. Polite smiles, careful questions, maybe a few tests to see if I was serious. I was wrong. They weren't intimidating. They were dismissive. I didn't even realize how deep it went until after the wedding. Before that, they could always pretend they were just being protective. After the wedding, the mask slipped. It became clear they didn't think I belonged in their world, and worse, they didn't think I ever could. At first it was subtle. Martin would ask about my work with that tone, friendly on paper but sharp around the edges. So Daniel, still tinkering with, what was it? Product design. I'm an engineer by training. Mechanical engineering specifically. I started in manufacturing, quality and process improvements. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. I liked seeing a problem, building something to fix it, and watching a process become smoother because I'd put my hands and mind into it. Then I moved into research and development for a mid-sized company that did packaging equipment. Again, not glamorous, but I was good at it. I wasn't the guy who dominated meetings. I was the guy who showed up with the data, the diagrams, and the prototype that actually worked. Evelyn would smile and say things like, "Oh, that's wonderful," in the same voice someone uses when a child shows them a crayon drawing. The real comments came out when Claire wasn't in the room. Martin once clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You know, Claire's always been drawn to projects, fixer-uppers. You'll do fine if you stay out of her way." Evelyn once told me, "We just want her to be taken care of. This lifestyle has requirements." Lifestyle. Requirements. Like love was a membership, and I was late on my dues. Still, for the first few years, I could tolerate it. I had a steady job. Claire and I had our small house. We weren't trying to compete with her parents. We were building our own version of a good life. Then everything shifted. It started with a restructuring at my company. New leadership came in with shiny presentations and buzzwords. They optimized. They streamlined. They eliminated departments and merged roles and treated experienced people like numbers on a spreadsheet. I survived the first round. Then the second. Then the third. By the fourth, I was called into a glass conference room with an HR rep I'd never met, and a manager who couldn't look me in the eye. They told me it wasn't personal. They said my work had been excellent. They offered me a severance package and a scripted apology. I nodded and said all the right things because that's what you do when the floor drops out from under you and you still need to walk out with your dignity intact. I drove home in silence and sat in my car for a full 5 minutes before I went inside. Claire didn't panic. She never does. She sat with me at the kitchen table and listened while I explained everything. The layoffs, the package, the timeline, the uncertainty. "We'll be okay," she said, and I believed her. I had savings. I had a resume I was proud of. I had contacts. I had skills. I figured it would take a month or two, maybe 3, and then I'd be back in a role that made sense. But the job market had a different plan. I sent out applications. I tailored cover letters. I sat through interviews where people smiled, nodded, and then disappeared. I got ghosted by recruiters. I got turned down for roles I was overqualified for because they assumed I'd leave as soon as something better came along. I got turned down for roles I was qualified for because they wanted someone with a slightly different software background or industry niche. Weeks turned into months. And during those months, something else happened. Something I hadn't planned to tell anyone about at first because it was still fragile. I started working on an idea. Not a vague, maybe someday idea, but a specific engineering solution I'd been thinking about for years. It had to do with a recurring problem in packaging lines. Wasted motion, misalignment, small inefficiencies that compound into huge costs. The companies I'd worked for patched over it with workarounds and training and constant adjustments, but the core issue remained. I had sketches tucked away in old notebooks. I had measurements and concepts and a design that in theory could reduce downtime and increase throughput without requiring a full equipment overhaul. When I lost my job, I suddenly had something I'd never had in my adult life: time. So I treated it like work. I set a schedule. I built models. I ran simulations. I spent long afternoons at my workbench in the garage tinkering with small-scale components and 3D printed parts. I kept spreadsheets of test results. I documented everything. Claire would bring me coffee, lean against the doorway, and watch me like I was doing something heroic instead of messy and obsessive. "You light up when you're doing this," she said one night. "It's probably just desperation," I told her. "No," she said. "It's you." We didn't talk about it with her parents. Not because it was some big secret, but because I didn't want their commentary hovering over it. I didn't want Martin's skeptical half-smile. I didn't want Evelyn's patronizing encouragement. I wanted the idea to stand on its own feet first. Meanwhile, the outside world saw only one thing. I didn't have a job. To Martin and Evelyn, unemployment wasn't just a circumstance. It was a character flaw. It was proof. Their comments became less subtle. At a family dinner, Martin asked, "So what are you doing all day, Daniel?" "Besides applying, of course." "I'm working on a design project," I said carefully. "Engineering work." Evelyn dabbed her lips with her napkin. "How nice. A little hobby to keep your spirits up." "It's not a hobby," I said, and I could hear my own voice tightening. Claire reached for my hand under the table. A quiet warning and a quiet comfort at the same time. Martin's eyebrows rose. "Well, I'm sure it's something, but you know Claire is used to a certain pace in life. Ambition, progress, progress. As if my value as a husband could be measured in quarterly growth." After that dinner, Claire cried in the car. Not because of what they said about me, but because she hated being caught between the people who raised her and the person she'd chosen. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. I kept telling her she didn't have to apologize for them. But the truth was, their words stuck to me anyway. They got under my skin in the quiet moments when I was alone, when an application came back rejected, when I stared at my computer screen and wondered if I was being naive about my project. There's a particular kind of humiliation that comes from being judged while you're still fighting. It's not like failing after you've given up. It's being kicked while you're still trying to stand. The next escalation came in the form of an invitation. Evelyn called Claire one afternoon, then followed up with an email that looked like it had been drafted by a professional assistant. Crisp formatting, tasteful fonts, all the details laid out like a formal summons. The Wexler Foundation Annual Giving Gala. Black tie, downtown. Sponsors, donors, board members, local press. A keynote, a presentation, a live auction. Claire read the email out loud at the kitchen counter while I rinsed dishes. I could tell by her tone she already knew what I was thinking. "I don't have to go," I said. "It's expected," she replied, and her eyes didn't meet mine at first. That word, expected, carried a whole family history inside it. I dried my hands slowly on a towel. "Are they inviting me because they want me there, or because it looks bad if you show up without your husband?" Claire's mouth tightened. "Probably the second one." I nodded because that was honest. The gala wasn't just a party. It was a stage. It was where Evelyn got to be admired, where Martin got to be respected, where Claire got to be displayed like proof their family was still polished and perfect, and where I, if I showed up, would be evaluated. Not directly, not with obvious cruelty, at least not in front of strangers, but in the same way people glance at a scuff on a designer shoe, in the way conversations pause half a beat too long, in the way questions are asked that aren't really questions. "What do you do, Daniel? How's work going, Daniel? Still between things, Daniel?" There was another layer too, one that made my stomach feel heavy. The fact that I'd been spending my days in a garage workshop, living on savings, trying to build something that might never matter. From the outside, it didn't look like effort. It looked like unemployment. And Martin and Evelyn were the kind of people who thought appearances were reality. Claire and I argued about it, gently at first, then with more frustration than either of us wanted. "I hate putting you in that room," she said. "I don't want to be in that room," I replied. "But if you don't go, they'll spin it," she said, voice rising. "They'll say you're ashamed, or lazy, or that you're punishing me." I leaned back against the counter and stared at the tile floor. "So if I go, I get humiliated. If I don't go, you get cornered." Claire exhaled, and I heard the exhaustion in it. Yes, that was the first time she admitted out loud what we both already knew. This wasn't about one night. It was about power. Her parents used social settings the way some people use contracts, subtly, strategically, with leverage. I thought about telling her everything, about the progress I'd made, about the calls I'd had with a patent attorney, about the paperwork I'd been quietly organizing. But I didn't. Not yet. Because hope is delicate, and if you share it too early with the wrong people, they don't just doubt it, they contaminate it. Instead, I said, "Okay, I'll go." Claire looked relieved and guilty at the same time. She stepped forward and hugged me tightly like she was trying to shield me with her arms. "We'll stay together," she said. "The whole night. If they say anything, we leave." I wanted to believe we could control it like that, like it was just a matter of boundaries and timing. But I'd already learned something about her parents. They didn't attack with fists. They attacked with rooms full of people. Over the next 2 weeks, the gala started to loom over our lives. Claire had a fitting for her dress. She asked me to get my tux cleaned. Evelyn sent another email about arrival times and valet instructions. Martin called once, speaking to me directly for the first time in months. "Daniel," he said, like he was doing me a favor by saying my name, "we're counting on you to be presentable. This is an important event." Presentable. Like I was a questionable accessory. "I understand," I said evenly. There was a pause, then he added, "And just keep things light. You know how these crowds are. Nobody likes awkward personal stories." He meant unemployment. He meant me. "Of course," I said. After I hung up, I sat at my desk in the spare bedroom that doubled as my workspace. On the screen in front of me were CAD drawings and a checklist from my attorney. Deadlines, forms, references, real work, serious work. I looked at it for a long moment and felt something hard settle in my chest. I wasn't ashamed of the months I'd been without a job. I'd been working. I'd been building. I'd been trying. But I was tired of being treated like my worth depended on whether I could impress Martin Wexler's friends over appetizers. The day of the gala arrived cold and clear, one of those winter evenings where the sky looks clean and distant. Claire got ready in our bedroom, the soft rustle of fabric and the click of jewelry carrying down the hall. I stood in front of the mirror in my tux and barely recognized myself. The suit fit fine, but it felt like a costume, like I was dressing up as someone who belonged in a world that didn't want me. When Claire stepped out, she looked stunning. Not in an exaggerated, attention-grabbing way, just effortlessly, like she was meant to be seen in rooms like the one we were headed to. "You okay?" she asked, adjusting my bow tie with careful fingers. "I'm fine," I said, and the lie tasted familiar. We drove downtown with the radio off. The city lights grew brighter as we got closer, and my thoughts got louder. I kept imagining the kinds of conversations I'd be forced into. The sideways smiles, the subtle digs, Evelyn's friends who would pretend to be interested, and then exchange looks when I said I was between roles. Claire reached over and squeezed my hand at a red light. "We do this," she said quietly, "and then we go home." I nodded. "We do this, and then we go home." As we turned into the entrance of the hotel where the gala was being held, I saw the valet line, the clusters of people in expensive coats, the flashes of cameras near the step-and-repeat backdrop, and I knew, with a certainty that made my mouth go dry, that I wasn't walking into a charity event. I was walking into a test, and for the first time in months, I wasn't only worried about failing, I was worried about what I might finally be forced to say out loud. Inside, the hotel lobby looked like a different country. Everything smelled like polished stone and expensive perfume. A string quartet played somewhere beyond a set of tall double doors, and the sound floated through the hallway in careful, elegant waves. People moved in clusters, laughing too loudly, touching each other's arms like they were all sharing private jokes. Claire's hand stayed on my forearm as we approached the registration table. Her touch wasn't clingy. It was anchoring. A volunteer in a black dress greeted us with a bright professional smile. "Names?" "Claire Wexler Holt," Claire said. The volunteer's eyes widened just a fraction. Of course, welcome, we're so glad you're here. I watched the familiar pattern unfold. The subtle shift in posture, the extra warmth, the slight quickening as the volunteer reached for our name cards and a pair of programs with the Gala's logo embossed in gold. Then she glanced at me. "And you are?" "Daniel," I said. "Daniel Holt." Her smile stayed, but it lost something. Like I'd just turned from a person into an attachment. "Wonderful," she said, and handed me a generic name tag without looking at it twice. It was a small thing, a harmless thing, but it set the tone. We stepped into the ballroom and I felt the air change. It was warmer in there, thick with conversation and clinking glasses. Round tables covered in linen surrounded a raised stage. Screens hung on either side, currently showing looping footage of smiling volunteers, donation drives, and black and white photos of the foundation's humble beginnings. Evelyn's humble beginnings, I thought, which I'd heard about so many times they felt like a family scripture. Claire and I were barely 3 steps inside when Evelyn appeared like she'd been conjured. She wore a sleek navy gown and a diamond necklace that caught the light every time she moved her head. Her hair was swept up and perfect. "Claire," she said, pulling my wife into a hug. The hug looked affectionate to anyone watching, but I knew Evelyn well enough to see how controlled it was, how performative. Then she turned to me. "Daniel," she said, not unkindly but without warmth either. "You made it." I almost smiled at the phrasing, like it had been a question all day whether I could pull off the feat of showing up. "Good evening," I said. Evelyn's eyes flicked down my tux, then back up. "At least you cleaned up well." Claire's hand tightened on my forearm. That was her first warning of the night, delivered silently. Before I could respond, Martin approached. He looked exactly like he belonged here. Tall, silver hair, tailored tux, the easy confidence of a man who had spent decades walking into rooms and being welcomed. He shook my hand firmly, like he was closing a deal. "Daniel." "Martin." He leaned in slightly. "Try to enjoy yourself tonight. It's all very uplifting." The way he said uplifting made it sound like a chore. Claire forced a bright smile. "Where are we sitting?" Evelyn gestured with her champagne flute. "Your table is near the front. We have board members and sponsors there. Claire, I'll need you to circulate before dinner. A few donors have been asking after you." Of course they have, I thought. Claire was a social asset. She always had been. "And Daniel," Evelyn added as if remembering me again, "you can stay close. Just follow Claire's lead." Follow Claire's lead. Like I was a new intern at a firm dinner. We walked toward the table area, weaving through clusters of guests. People stopped Claire constantly. Women in glittering dresses, men in crisp tuxedos, all greeting her with practiced familiarity. "Claire, you look radiant." "Claire, darling, how are you? It's been too long." Some acknowledged me. Most didn't. The ones who did asked questions that were really evaluations. "And you are?" "Daniel." "Ah, yes, Claire's husband." That phrase, Claire's husband, kept landing like a label stuck to my chest. One couple, a man with a shiny bald head and a woman wearing a bracelet that looked like it could fund a semester of college, spoke to Claire for 2 full minutes before the woman turned to me and asked, "So Daniel, what line of work are you in?" I'd rehearsed this in my head in the car. "Engineering," I said. "Mechanical. I've been in R&D for most of my career." The man nodded politely. "And where are you now?" There it was. The trap door. I could have lied. People lied at events like this all the time. I could have said I was consulting. I could have said I was between contracts. But something in me refused. "I'm currently between roles," I said. "I was part of a restructuring. I'm looking, and I've also been developing a design project." The woman's smile stayed in place, but her eyes cooled. "Oh, well, that must be an adjustment." The man patted my shoulder in the way people do when they want to signal sympathy while also distancing themselves. "You'll land on your feet." They drifted away within seconds. Claire exhaled slowly after they left. "I'm sorry." "Don't," I murmured. "It's not you." But even as I said it, I felt the familiar tightness in my throat, the sense of being judged for existing in an inconvenient state. We reached our table near the front. A small card on the centerpiece read, "Table 3. Welkser Foundation lead sponsors." Great, I thought. Front row seats to my own humiliation. At the table were Martin and Evelyn, Claire and me, plus several other people, a younger man with slick hair and a sharp jawline named Brent Calloway, introduced as one of the foundation's emerging partners, and a woman named Dana Pierce, who Evelyn described as a dear friend and an incredible supporter. Dana's eyes lingered on Claire with the kind of admiration that felt genuine. Then she looked at me with the kind of polite curiosity people reserve for someone they don't quite understand. We weren't seated for long before Evelyn leaned toward Brent. "Brent, I want you to meet my daughter properly," she said. "Claire has always had such a mind for strategy. You two should talk." Claire's smile froze for half a second. She recovered quickly, but I saw it. Then Evelyn turned to me as if to soften the maneuver. "And Daniel," she said. "Brent is in venture capital. He's very tuned in to employment trends. Perhaps he can give you advice." Advice. Not connections, not an introduction. Advice. Like I was a high school graduate applying for my first job. Brent shook my hand. His grip was limp. His smile was bright and empty. "Nice to meet you, Daniel." "Likewise." He turned immediately back to Claire. "So Claire, I heard you used to work in nonprofit development. That's fascinating. I love people who are mission-driven." I watched him angle his body away from me, leaving me at the edge of the conversation like an abandoned coat. Claire, to her credit, didn't take the bait. She kept her answers brief, always circling back to include me. But the effort was visible, and it made me angrier than the snubs, because it wasn't just me they were insulting. It was her marriage. It was her choice. As cocktails continued, Martin stood and began moving through the room. He shook hands. He made introductions. He collected compliments like they were donations. Evelyn did the same, drifting from group to group with the smooth confidence of a woman who could organize a hurricane. Claire was pulled into it constantly. People wanted her at their tables for photos, for quick words, for catching up. I followed behind her like a shadow because Evelyn had told me to, and because leaving Claire alone in this room felt like abandoning her in a pack of wolves wearing perfume. At one point, Claire was speaking to an older woman in a silver dress. The woman's laugh was high and sharp, and she spoke with the certainty of someone who had never wondered if her card would be declined. "And Daniel," she said suddenly, turning her head toward me, "I heard you're taking a little break from working." Claire stiffened. I kept my face calm. "I'm between roles." "Oh yes," the woman said, like she hadn't heard the difference. "That's what they call it now." Then she leaned toward Claire and lowered her voice, but not enough. "My nephew went through something similar. He got so depressed, poor thing. But he recovered once he found something appropriate for him. Appropriate, like I'd been overreaching by being employed at all." Claire's smile turned sharp. "Daniel isn't depressed. He's working on something important." The woman blinked. "How lovely." Her eyes slid away from me again. I felt heat rise behind my ears. Not rage that made you want to shout, but the slow burn of being treated like a flaw in the decor. We moved on. As the room filled, I started noticing something else. Small signs of a planned moment later in the evening. People kept mentioning a presentation, a special feature, a surprise partnership announcement. I overheard two men near the bar talking. "Did you hear they're doing the Meridian demo tonight?" one asked. "Yeah," the other replied. "Apparently it's a game changer. Something about reducing waste in industrial packaging. Big numbers." My attention sharpened despite myself. Industrial packaging. They weren't talking about a children's hospital donation. They were talking about a product. I didn't know what Meridian was, but the subject hit too close to the work I'd been doing in my garage. Claire returned from a short conversation with a donor and leaned toward me. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, though my heart was beating a little faster now. "Do you know what the presentation is tonight?" Claire frowned slightly. "Mom mentioned a sponsor showcase. One of the companies that funded the gala wanted a segment." I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Did she say which company?" Claire shook her head. "No, why?" I hesitated. "I overheard someone talking about industrial packaging. It's in my wheelhouse." Claire's eyes searched mine. "Is that a bad thing?" "It might be nothing," I said, "just interesting." I didn't want to say more. Not here. Not while Evelyn could appear behind us at any moment. And she did. "Claire," Evelyn said briskly, "I need you for a photo. Daniel, you can come too, but stand to the side. It's mainly board members. Stand to the side." I felt my jaw clench so hard my molars ached. We walked to the step-and-repeat backdrop where the foundation logo was printed in elegant gold. A photographer directed people into position like a drill sergeant. Evelyn placed Claire at the center, of course. Martin stood on her other side. Brent positioned himself too close to Claire for my liking, smiling like he'd already decided he belonged there. Evelyn glanced at me. "Daniel, just there," she said, pointing slightly away from the group. I stood where she indicated. The flash went off 3 times. On the third, Brent leaned toward Claire and murmured something that made her expression tighten. I couldn't hear it, But I saw it. When the photo was over, Claire stepped back toward me immediately, like she'd been released from a trap. "What did he say?" I asked quietly. Claire's smile was strained. "He asked if I ever miss being with someone who matches my world." The words hit me like cold water. I stared at her, stunned. "He said that?" Claire nodded once, eyes glossy with restrained anger. I told him no. I took a breath through my nose. The temptation to march back over, grab Brent by the collar, and ask him to repeat it louder was strong enough that my hands curled into fists at my sides. But I didn't, not because I was afraid of him, but because I knew what that would do. It would turn me into the problem. At events like this, the person who reacts is always painted as unstable. The person who provokes gets to look innocent. Evelyn appeared again with the soft predatory timing of someone who sensed tension. "Everything all right?" she asked Claire, her voice sweet. "Fine," Claire said tightly. Evelyn's gaze flicked to me. "Daniel, why don't you get yourself a drink? You look a bit tense." I didn't miss the way she said it like a diagnosis. "I'm fine," I said. Evelyn's smile widened a fraction. "Of course." We returned to our table for dinner. The lights dimmed slightly. Servers moved in synchronized lines, placing salads and bread baskets with practiced precision. A host stepped onto the stage and tapped the microphone. The room quieted in waves. "Good evening, everyone," the host said, voice bright and trained. "Welcome to the Wexler Foundation Annual Giving Gala." He spoke about community impact, gratitude, generosity. People clapped on cue. While he talked, Martin leaned toward me and said under his breath, "Try to look engaged." I turned my head slightly. "Excuse me?" He smiled without warmth. "People notice these things, Daniel. If you look bored, it reflects on Claire." There it was again, the implication that my mere presence was a liability she had to manage. I nodded slowly. "Understood." Across the table, Evelyn was already scanning the room, her mind on optics, on influence, on who owed her what. Dinner continued in courses. Conversation stayed superficial. When someone asked me what I did, Martin or Evelyn would answer for me before I could. "Daniel is exploring options right now," Evelyn would say brightly. "He's taking time to think about the right fit." Explore. Think. Like I was wandering through a mall deciding which store I liked best. At one point, Dana Pierce, Evelyn's dear friend, asked me directly, "Daniel, what kind of engineering do you do?" Her tone was different. Not a trap, a real question. "Mechanical," I said. "Mostly systems design, efficiency improvements, manufacturing lines." Dana's eyes lit with actual interest. "That's impressive. My husband's company does industrial supply chain work. He's always talking about how small design changes can save millions." Before I could respond, Martin cut in. "Daniel is very hands-on," he said, smiling as if he were praising a child. "Always building little contraptions." Dana blinked. "Contraptions?" I felt my face harden. "Prototypes," I corrected calmly. "Functional prototypes." Martin lifted his glass. "Whatever you call them." Claire's fork paused midair. I saw her control tighten like a wire about to snap. Evelyn leaned toward Dana. "We're actually featuring one of our sponsors' innovations tonight. It's going to be quite exciting." "Very modern." Dana nodded. "Oh, is that the Meridian thing?" I heard whispers. Evelyn's smile sharpened. "Yes." My chest tightened again. "Meridian." I pretended to take a sip of water while my mind raced through possibilities. It could be anything. A brand name, a project name, a product line. But the way Dana said it, like she'd heard whispers, made it sound like something people in that world cared about. The host returned to the microphone after the main course, voice rising with enthusiasm. "And now," he said, "before we begin our live auction, we have a special presentation from one of our premier sponsors. This year, we are honored to partner with Meridian Industrial Systems, who will share a breakthrough that's changing the way manufacturers think about efficiency and waste." Applause rolled through the room. The screens beside the stage shifted from foundation imagery to a sleek corporate slide, Meridian Industrial Systems, Innovation Spotlight. My pulse kicked hard enough that I felt it in my throat. Claire leaned toward me, whispering, "Daniel, I don't know," I whispered back. "Just watch." On stage, a man in a tailored suit stepped up with the confidence of a keynote speaker. He smiled, thanked the foundation, praised Evelyn and Martin by name. Then he clicked a remote. A new slide appeared, a diagram of a packaging line mechanism. Clean lines, familiar geometry. My mouth went dry. It wasn't identical to my work, at least, not at first glance, but it was close enough that my brain started filling in the missing details like a reflex. The man continued. This component reduces misalignment, minimizes downtime, and increases throughput without requiring a full system replacement. I barely heard the rest, because my mind was locked on the diagram and a single thought kept repeating louder each time. I have seen that shape before. I leaned forward slightly, trying to get a better view. The lighting in the ballroom made the screens glare, but the more I looked, the more certain I became that this wasn't just similar. This was connected. Claire's fingers found my knee under the table, gripping gently. "What is it?" she whispered. I swallowed. "I'm not sure," I said, and I hated how unsteady my voice sounded. "But something's wrong, or something's very right." Across from me, Martin was watching the presentation with a pleased smile, nodding along like he understood every word. Evelyn glanced at me and then at Claire, her expression flickering with satisfaction. And I realized, suddenly, that they thought this was their kind of moment, their world, their win. They had no idea what was about to be on those screens. The speaker clicked again. The next slide began to load, and at the bottom of it, in small but unmistakably official formatting, I saw a line that made my stomach drop. "Patent pending. Registration details to follow." I froze, eyes locked on the screen, as if looking away would make it less real. Then the speaker said, "To be fully transparent, we're proud of this innovation, but we're even prouder of the partnership behind it. Because tonight, we're not just showcasing a product. We're showcasing who really owns the idea." And with that, he clicked forward again. The slide changed, and the room collectively leaned in the way wealthy rooms do when they sense they're about to be impressed. A glossy graphic appeared, a product render floating against a dark background, lit like a luxury car commercial. Under it, bold text read, "Meridian-aligned trademark, a modular self-correcting guide assembly." My eyes didn't go to the name. They went to the geometry, the core mechanism, the angled guide surfaces, the spring-loaded correction arm. The way the mounting bracket sat offset wasn't just familiar anymore. It was mine. Not kind of like mine. Not in the same category. Mine. I felt the blood drain out of my face so fast I got dizzy. For half a second, my brain tried to protect me with denial. Maybe someone else solved the same problem. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe I'm seeing patterns because I want to. But then the presenter zoomed in on the component, and I saw the detail I'd obsessed over for weeks, the micro-adjustment notch placement. I'd moved it 3 millimeters in my final design because of a stress point that only showed up after multiple cycles. It wasn't an obvious change. It wasn't aesthetic. It was engineering necessity. No one accidentally lands on that. Claire's grip on my knee tightened until it almost hurt. "Daniel," she whispered, voice shaking, "what is happening?" I swallowed hard. My mouth felt full of cotton. I think that's my mechanism." She stared at me. What do you mean your mechanism?" Before I could answer, the presenter smiled and said into the microphone, "Now we know what you're thinking. Innovation is one thing. Ownership is another. So tonight we're going to show you something most companies keep behind closed doors." A murmur rippled through the ballroom, excited and curious. He clicked again. The screen shifted from the glossy marketing render to something plain and bureaucratic. A government-style web page screenshot with a seal in the corner, a registration header, and rows of text. Even from my seat, I recognized the layout, because I'd stared at it on my laptop at 2 in the morning, refreshing like a man waiting for a heart monitor to beep. United States Patent and Trademark Office. My throat tightened so sharply it felt like a hand. The presenter said, "This is the official filing record for the core assembly behind Meridian-aligned. Patent application number." He read a long string of digits. My vision tunneled. I barely registered the number aloud because my eyes had already locked onto the field labeled Inventor Applicant, and there it was. Daniel R. Holt. For a second, the entire ballroom sound dropped away. I could still see people clapping lightly, still see faces turned toward the stage, but it was like watching through glass. My name was on those screens. My actual name. Not a company name. Not a brand. Me. Claire let out a small, strangled sound beside me and covered her mouth with her hand. Her eyes went wide and wet at the same time. Across the table, Martin's smile froze. It didn't fade gradually. It stopped, like someone hit pause on his face. Evelyn blinked rapidly, as if the words would rearrange themselves into something more acceptable if she stared long enough. Brent Calloway's head snapped toward me so fast it looked like he might have strained his neck. Dana Pierce's eyes widened, then narrowed, as she studied me like she was recalculating my entire existence. I sat perfectly still, hands flat on my thighs, because if I moved, I wasn't sure I wouldn't fall apart. The presenter continued, unaware or unconcerned with the shock he'd just detonated at table 3. "And yes," he said, voice carrying with confidence, "that Daniel Holt." Some nervous laughter scattered through the room, the kind that comes from people realizing they're witnessing something private in a public setting. My ears finally caught up. He was confirming it deliberately. This wasn't an accident. This was planned. Evelyn's head turned toward Claire, then toward me, her expression tightening into something that was not quite anger and not quite fear. It was the look of a woman watching a narrative she controlled slip out of her hands. Martin leaned forward slightly, his voice low and sharp so only our table could hear. "What is this?" he hissed. Claire turned to him, stunned. "What do you mean, what is this?" "That's Daniel's name." Martin's jaw worked as if he were chewing on a thought he couldn't swallow. "Daniel," he said, voice clipped. "Why is your name on the screen?" I could have answered with a clean sentence. I could have said, "Because I invented it." But something inside me refused to give him the satisfaction of a neat explanation right then. Not after months of being treated like dead weight. So I said the truth, slowly. "Because I filed it." Evelyn's voice came in soft and poisonous. "Filed what, Daniel?" My eyes stayed on the screen, not on her. "A patent." Brent let out a small scoff, trying to reassert his footing. "Come on. People file patents for all kinds of nonsense." Dana shot him a look. "Not when Meridian Industrial Systems is presenting it at a gala." Brent's face tightened, and he went quiet. On stage, the presenter clicked again, and a new section of the official record filled the screens. Diagrams. My diagrams, the same line drawings my attorney had helped format into proper USPTO style. I felt a strange involuntary surge of pride, quick, hot, and almost painful, because those diagrams weren't theoretical anymore. They weren't just lines in my garage notebook. They were on a screen in a ballroom full of people who had been ignoring me all night. The presenter said, "We can't go into every detail, but you'll notice the mechanism's modularity allows retrofitting across multiple line types. It's scalable, and it's protected." Then he smiled again. "And that brings us to the partnership." He clicked. A new slide appeared, and this one wasn't a government screenshot. It looked like a contract excerpt, clean, formal, with bold headings. Licensing agreement, executed. My heart thudded hard. Claire's hand found my wrist now, as if she needed to confirm I was real. The presenter said, "Meridian didn't just come up with this innovation. We licensed it from its inventor under a revenue-sharing model. And the best part is, the licensing structure ensures a portion of proceeds goes directly to the inventor automatically." Automatically. The word hit like a gavel. Evelyn inhaled sharply. Martin's eyes darted between the screen and me as if he was looking for the trick. I felt something settle in my chest. Not triumph. Not yet. Certainty. Because this wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a brag. It wasn't me trying to convince anyone of my value. It was paper. Official records. Executed agreements. The kind of proof Martin respected because it couldn't be smirked away. But even with that, Martin still tried. He leaned closer to me. Voice low, teeth tight. "Did you use my connections for this?" I turned my head slowly and met his eyes. "No." His nostrils flared. "Then how?" Evelyn cut him off with a brittle laugh that didn't match her eyes. "This is certainly surprising." Claire's voice came out steady, and I could hear the effort it took. "It's not surprising to me. Daniel has been working every day." Evelyn's gaze snapped to Claire. "Working in the garage." "Working," Claire repeated, like a correction and a warning. On stage, the presenter continued talking about projected impact, supply chain efficiency, reduced waste, increased throughput, numbers that made donors nod appreciatively. But I barely heard them because my mind had started replaying everything that led here. Every late night, every rejection email, every time I'd walked into a room and been treated like I was lucky to be allowed indoors. The memory that came up next wasn't even from the gala. It was from 4 months earlier, a small office with neutral walls and cheap coffee. My patent attorney, Marissa Klein, had slid a document across her desk and said, "Daniel, if you want to do this right, you don't just file, you document. You date everything, you keep records, and you don't tell anyone who doesn't need to know." I'd laughed then, half nervous. "What, like my in-laws?" Marissa had raised an eyebrow. "Especially your in-laws." I'd never told her much, but she'd read enough between my sentences to understand I had people in my life who saw me as disposable. Marissa had been the one to connect me with a licensing consultant, a guy who specialized in bridging small inventors to large manufacturers without letting the inventor get swallowed alive. We'd done calls, negotiations, NDAs. I'd signed things I barely understood at first, until Marissa walked me through every clause like she was teaching a class. And the biggest thing, the thing that made me feel like I could breathe again, was the revenue transfer structure. Marissa had insisted on it. Direct payment, she'd said. Not we'll pay you when we feel like it. Not you'll get a bonus if we're happy. Direct, auditable, automatic. I remembered asking, is that normal? She'd shrugged. Normal for people who refuse to get cheated. Back in the ballroom, the presenter clicked again, and the contract excerpt zoomed into a section with bolded language. Royalty distribution. Inventor payment shall be remitted directly to. The rest was blurred for the audience's privacy, but the message landed anyway. The room buzzed now, voices swelling like a wave finally breaking. People turned in their seats, heads swiveled. I could feel eyes on me from every direction, like I'd become a sudden point of interest they couldn't ignore. Dana Pierce leaned toward me, voice low but sincere. Daniel, why didn't Evelyn tell anyone about this? It wasn't an accusation toward me. It was a question that assumed the obvious, that if Evelyn knew, she would have weaponized it in her favor. Evelyn's face tightened at Dana's words. Because we didn't know, she said quickly, too quickly. Claire stared at her mother. You didn't know because you never asked. Not once. You just decided. Evelyn's lips pressed into a line. Claire, this is not the time. Claire's laugh came out short and humorless. No, Mom, this is exactly the time. Martin's voice dropped into something dangerous. Daniel, he said, did you plan this? Did you set this up to embarrass us? I looked at him for a long moment. Embarrass you. After months of their comments, their smirks, their little humiliations delivered like appetizers between courses, he had the nerve to frame himself as the victim. I didn't set up their presentation, I said quietly. I didn't even know they were doing this tonight. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Then why didn't you tell us you had this? Because you would have made it about you, I thought. Because you would have introduced me as our son-in-law like I was a charity project you'd funded. Because you would have smiled in public and cut me down in private, just in a new way. But I didn't say any of that. Not yet, I said, because every time I tried to explain what I was working on, you called it a hobby. Evelyn's cheeks flushed. That is not what I said. You said it was a hobby, I replied. Still calm. You said it was to keep my spirits up. Martin's mouth opened, then closed. He looked around, sensing the attention at our table. The room had noticed the tension now, the way wealthy rooms always notice discomfort like it's a stain. The presenter on stage wrapped up with a thank you and a polished smile. We're proud of what this innovation will do for efficiency, for sustainability, and for the partnership between industry and independent inventors. Applause surged again, louder this time, because people love clapping for a story with a clean ending. But our story wasn't clean. Not yet. As the applause continued, the host returned to the mic, energized. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we move into our live auction. The lights brightened slightly as servers began clearing plates, and people started talking more openly now, leaning toward neighbors, whispering, pointing subtly. I could hear snippets drifting like smoke. Is that him? That's her husband? I thought he was. I don't know, I assumed. Meridian's licensing independent inventors now? That's smart. At our table, silence sat heavy. Claire finally spoke, her voice low and trembling with anger held back for too long. All night you treated him like he was nothing, like he was an embarrassment. Evelyn looked offended. Claire. No, Claire cut in. You introduced him like an accessory. You told him to stand to the side. You let Brent talk to me like my marriage was negotiable. Brent shifted uncomfortably. I didn't mean. Claire turned toward him, eyes sharp. You meant exactly what you said. Brent's face reddened and he looked away. Martin's gaze stayed on me, calculating again, trying to regain control of the narrative. Daniel, he said, softer now, we're family. You should have told us. We could have helped you present this properly, in the right circles. There it was. Even now, even after seeing my name on a government record, he still framed my success as something that needed his approval, his packaging, his circles. I felt something cold and steady settle behind my ribs, and I realized the real problem hadn't been unemployment. The real problem was that in their world, my worth only existed if they could claim it. The host's voice boomed cheerfully about auction items and donor paddles, and the room began to shift back into gala mode, eager for entertainment. But at our table the air felt thin. Claire leaned toward me and whispered, "Are you okay?" I looked at her, and for the first time all night, I let myself be honest. "I don't know," I said quietly, "but I'm done being treated like I'm lucky to be here." Claire nodded once, fierce and tearful. "Good." Across from us, Evelyn lifted her glass and forced a smile at a nearby table that had started looking our way. She was already trying to patch the image. Martin straightened his shoulders, adjusting his cufflinks like a man resetting after a stumble. But their hands were shaking just slightly, because they could feel it too. The room was talking now, and whatever story they'd planned to tell about me, about the unemployed son-in-law who didn't match their world, had just been replaced by a different story entirely, one they couldn't control. Not anymore. The auction started with the usual theater, bright smiles, polished jokes from the host, paddles lifted like it was all fun and not a carefully choreographed display of status. A weekend in Aspen, a private chef dinner, a rare bottle of something that looked like brown glass and ego. People laughed, people bid, people clapped, and all around me the room kept shifting because now I wasn't invisible anymore. I could feel it in the way heads turned when I stood to let a server pass, in the way conversations paused when I walked behind Claire toward the aisle, in the way strangers' eyes lingered on my name tag like it had suddenly become a credential. At first it almost made me nauseous, not because attention is inherently bad, but because it was so clearly conditional. It wasn't, "We see you." It was, "We see what you're worth." Claire stayed close, her hand occasionally brushing mine, like she was reminding me I didn't have to handle this alone. Martin and Evelyn, meanwhile, went into damage control mode. It was subtle, if you didn't know them. A softer smile, a slightly louder laugh, an exaggerated calm as they spoke to people at nearby tables. But I knew what it was. They were trying to reframe the story before it spread beyond their ability to shape it. Evelyn leaned toward Dana Pierce, voice light. "Isn't it amazing? We're so proud of Daniel. He's always been creative." Dana looked between Evelyn and me, her expression cool. "Creative is one word." Evelyn's smile held. "Well, you know what I mean. Innovative." Martin cleared his throat and leaned in like he was joining a board meeting. "Daniel has always had potential. He just needed the right environment." The right environment, as if my garage was some kind of waiting room until his world deemed me worthy. I kept my voice even. The right environment was time and focus. Martin's eyes narrowed just slightly. "And resources." I met his gaze. My severance and my savings were resources. Claire turned toward her father, sharp as a blade. "Are you seriously trying to claim you funded this?" Martin held up his hands, palms outward, the universal gesture of innocence. "No one said that. I'm simply saying it's good you had support." Evelyn chimed in. "We're all glad things are looking up, Daniel. Truly." I almost laughed at the phrase "looking up," like the past months had been a cloudy inconvenience for them, not my life. The host called out another item, and the crowd roared, and I realized something uncomfortable. In a room like this, public momentum mattered more than private truth. If Evelyn could convince people, even loosely, that she and Martin had been supporting me, then this whole thing could become another Wexler narrative, another asset they managed. I leaned toward Claire and spoke quietly. "They're going to try to take credit." Claire's jaw tightened. "Let them try." At the far side of the ballroom, I noticed a small cluster forming near the stage steps. A few men in suits, one woman holding a tablet, and two people wearing Meridian-branded lapel pins. They weren't donors. They looked like corporate staff, communications, legal, maybe sales. One of the men glanced in our direction, scanned the tables, then started walking straight toward us. My stomach tightened. Claire noticed too. "Is that Meridian?" "I think so," I said. The man approached with a professional smile that still managed to feel human. "Daniel Holt?" he asked. I stood automatically, "Yes." He extended his hand. "Ethan Park. I'm with Meridian Industrial Systems. Thank you for coming tonight." My grip was firm, but my palm was damp. I didn't realize Meridian would be presenting. Ethan's smile sharpened slightly, like he'd been waiting to say this. "We know. That's why we coordinated with your counsel. We wanted it to be clean, public, but respectful." "My counsel, Marissa." I felt Claire's eyes on me, wide and questioning. I could practically hear her thoughts. "You had a lawyer? You had a whole process?" Ethan glanced at Claire and offered his hand. "And you must be Claire. It's a pleasure." Claire shook his hand. "Likewise." Ethan turned back to me. "When you have a moment, we'd like to speak with you briefly. There are a few press questions and, well, donors are curious. We can do it discreetly in the sponsor lounge." My mouth went dry. Press questions? Ethan nodded. Nothing invasive, but your story resonates. Independent inventor, practical innovation, licensing partnership. People love that. People love that, he said, like it was a product feature. Ethan's gaze flicked past me to Martin and Evelyn, who were watching with frozen smiles. Also, he added smoothly, we'd like to confirm a few details related to the license structure just so the messaging stays accurate. Martin's posture stiffened, like he wanted to step in and speak for me. Before he could, I said, sure. When? Ethan glanced at his watch. After this auction segment. 10 minutes? I nodded. Okay. Ethan handed me a small card with his contact information. I'll meet you near the sponsor lounge entrance. When he walked away, the air around our table shifted again. Claire stared at me. Quiet but intense. Your counsel? I swallowed. I didn't want to talk about it until things were finalized. Claire's eyes softened a fraction. Daniel, you could have told me. I know, I said, and I meant it. I wasn't hiding it from you. I was protecting it. Protecting us. Claire looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. She just nodded once, slowly, and laced her fingers through mine under the table. Martin leaned forward, voice low. Why is Meridian coordinating with your lawyer? I looked at him. Because Meridian licensed my patent. Evelyn let out a strained laugh. We saw that, on the screen. No, I said, still calm. You saw a presentation. There's a structure behind it. Legal structure. Martin's eyes sharpened with new interest. So you're being paid. There it was. Not congratulations. Not well done. Just the money. Yes, I replied. Evelyn's smile became brittle. Well, Daniel, if you're receiving income now, that's wonderful. You can finally contribute at a level that's more appropriate. Claire's head snapped toward her mother. Stop. Evelyn blinked, offended. Stop what? Talking about him like he's a wallet that just started working, Claire said. Martin held up a hand. Claire, don't make a scene. Claire's laugh came out sharp. You made a scene. All year. You just did it in private. The host's voice boomed again as another auction item hit a bidding war, and the loud applause gave Evelyn a convenient cover. She used it to lean toward me, her voice low enough that it felt like a threat wrapped in perfume. Daniel, she said, we should discuss this like adults. After tonight. Privately. I looked at her. Discuss what? Evelyn's eyes flickered. The future. You and Claire. Financial decisions. If this is going to change your situation, we need to be aligned. We need to be aligned. I almost smiled at the irony, considering Meridian Align was still glowing in my mind. Martin leaned in too, matching her tone. You're in a different bracket now. That comes with expectations. I felt something in me go still. Not angry. Steady. Let me be clear, I said quietly. My situation changed the moment the patent was filed. You just didn't respect it until it was on a big screen. Evelyn's cheeks flushed. That is unfair. Claire leaned closer, voice cold. Unfair is calling him unemployed and incompetent in front of strangers. Evelyn's eyes widened. I did not. Claire didn't blink. You did. In the lobby. You said, at least pretend you're employed tonight. And you laughed. Martin's face darkened. Evelyn's lips pressed together hard. It was a joke. I looked at her, calm enough that it probably unnerved her more than anger would have. It didn't feel like a joke. For a moment Evelyn actually looked shaken. Not remorseful, just caught, exposed. Then she recovered. She always did. Well, she said, lifting her glass slightly, we're all thrilled this worked out. We can move forward now. Move forward. Like you erase months of disrespect with one sentence. The auction continued. I barely registered the items. My attention stayed on the shifting social gravity around us. A man from another table approached during a pause and offered me his hand. Daniel Holt, he said, smiling wide. Gordon Chow. I'm on the board of the Raleigh Manufacturing Council. That was quite a presentation. Congratulations. Thank you, I said. Gordon nodded toward Martin and Evelyn. And of course Martin and Evelyn must be very proud. Martin straightened instantly, ready to accept the compliment like it belonged to him. But before he could, Gordon continued, still smiling. Independent inventors are rare. Takes grit, especially without backing. Without backing. It was said casually, almost kindly, but it landed like a pin. Martin's smile twitched. Evelyn's eyes narrowed just slightly. I watched them both absorb it, and something inside me loosened. The room was forming its own conclusion now, and it wasn't the one my in-laws wanted. Gordon asked. Are you working with anyone local on prototyping and manufacturing? I've done some prototypes myself, I said, and Meridian handled the scale-up. Gordon nodded appreciatively. Impressive. If you ever want to speak at one of our events, we'd love to host you. Thank you, I said again, and I meant it. Not because of the invitation, but because it was the first time all night someone spoke to me like I was a professional rather than a problem. Gordon moved on. Evelyn watched him go, then turned back to me with a tight smile. See? This is what we mean. Circles. Exposure. If you'd told us, we could have made introductions. I met her gaze. I didn't need introductions, I needed respect. For a heartbeat, Evelyn looked like she might actually snap. Then her eyes shifted, scanning the room, and she put her social mask back on. Daniel, she said softly, we're in public. Claire leaned in. So was he, Mom, when you humiliated him. A few minutes later, as the auction wound down, Ethan Park reappeared at the edge of our table. Daniel, he said gently, whenever you're ready. I glanced at Claire. Come with me. Claire stood immediately. Of course. Martin cleared his throat. I'll join as well. Ethan's smile stayed professional. The sponsor lounge is limited to sponsor reps and designated guests. Daniel is on the list. Claire can come as his guest. I'm afraid. Martin's jaw tightened. I'm a major donor. Ethan didn't blink. Understood. Tonight, Daniel is our designated guest. It was small, polite, but it was a boundary Martin wasn't used to being on the wrong side of. Evelyn's face tightened, but she kept smiling, because she could feel eyes on us. I didn't say anything. I just walked with Claire beside me, following Ethan through a side corridor. Behind us, the noise of the ballroom faded, replaced by quieter footsteps and muted voices. The sponsor lounge was smaller, carpeted and lined with high-top tables. A few corporate reps stood with drinks, talking in low tones. A woman with a tablet looked up as we entered. Daniel Holt, she said, checking something. Great, we just need a quick confirmation on the inventor messaging and the public numbers. Ethan introduced the woman as Lila from Meridian Communications. Another man stepped forward, older, with calm eyes and a measured handshake. Daniel, he said, I'm Thomas Avery. I oversee partnerships for Meridian's innovation program. I shook his hand. Nice to meet you. Thomas nodded. You did excellent work. The mechanism is performing above projections. Something warm flickered in my chest. Pride. Real this time. Thank you. Lila tapped her tablet. We have 2 local reporters who want a quote. Nothing personal. They're interested in the concept of independent inventors working with large manufacturers. Thomas added. We'd also like you to join us briefly on stage after the auction ends. Just a quick acknowledgement. 30 seconds. We'll keep it simple. My stomach dropped. On stage. Claire's eyes widened, but she didn't look scared. She looked ready. I took a slow breath. I didn't plan to speak tonight. Thomas's tone was steady. You don't have to. But it would help. It puts the inventor front and center. And frankly, it protects you. Protects me? I asked. Thomas nodded once. Public clarity matters. When money gets involved, people rewrite history. We prefer the history to be correct. My mind flashed to Martin and Evelyn at the table, already trying to position themselves as supporters. I understood immediately. Claire squeezed my hand. You can do it, she whispered. Ethan glanced at his watch. They'll cue us in about 5 minutes. Lila lowered her voice. Also, your attorney emailed earlier. She asked us to confirm you received the updated executed copy. I did, I said, and it was true. Marissa had sent me the final countersigned agreement a week ago. I'd opened it 3 times just to make sure it didn't disappear. Lila nodded. Good, because sometimes family members try to claim entitlements. We've seen it before. Claire's jaw tightened. His family won't. I didn't correct her, but the truth sat heavy. My family wouldn't. Hers might try. Thomas looked at me carefully. Daniel, I'm not here to interfere in your personal life, but I will tell you this. The licensing agreement is with you, not with anyone connected to you. Keep it that way. I nodded slowly. I intend to. Ethan stepped aside to answer a call. Lila typed quickly on her tablet, and in that quiet moment, with Claire beside me and Meridian's people treating me like I mattered, I felt something click into place. For months, Martin and Evelyn had used my unemployment as a weapon because it gave them control. It let them define me. It let them shrink me. But now the leverage was shifting. Not because I wanted revenge, because truth has weight. And once it's public, it's hard to push back into a corner. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting an email from Marissa or a calendar reminder. Instead, it was a text from an unknown number. Daniel, it's Brent. Can we talk? Alone. Now. It's important. I stared at the screen, my pulse ticking up again. Claire glanced at my phone. What is it? I showed her. Her expression hardened. No, I exhaled through my nose. He's panicking. Let him, Claire said. Another text followed immediately. Your in-laws are upset. They think Meridian used them. Martin wants to clarify the situation. Please don't do anything that makes them look bad. I felt a cold, familiar irritation. Even now, even after everything. Don't make them look bad, as if my job was still to protect their image. I looked up and saw Ethan returning, phone back in his pocket, expression focused. We're up next, he said. Thomas nodded toward the corridor leading back toward the stage entrance. Ready? I looked at Claire and she held my gaze steady. Then I looked down at Brent's message again, and I realized this wasn't just about a patent or a contract anymore. This was about whether I would keep shrinking to fit into their story, or finally publicly refuse. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and said, Yeah? I took one more breath, then followed Ethan and Thomas toward the corridor that led back to the ballroom, toward the stage, toward whatever Martin and Evelyn were trying to stop. The corridor opened near the side of the stage, behind a curtain and a row of stacked equipment cases. I could hear the ballroom again, auction chatter, glass clinks, the host's voice rising and falling like he was conducting an orchestra. Ethan leaned in and spoke quietly. We'll keep it simple. Thomas will introduce you as the inventor. The host will hand you the mic for one short line if you want. You can decline. I nodded, but my throat felt too tight to answer. Claire stood half a step behind me, close enough that I could feel her presence like warmth through fabric. She squeezed my hand once, then let go so I wouldn't walk out there looking like I needed to be led. The host's voice boomed, energized, and before we close this auction segment, Meridian Industrial Systems has one more brief acknowledgement. Please join me in welcoming Thomas Avery back to the stage. Applause rolled in. Thomas stepped out first, calm and steady. Ethan motioned for me to follow. I took one step, then another, and suddenly the stage lights hit my face, and the room became a sea of silhouettes. From up here, everything looked different. You can't hide in a room when you're above it. I saw Martin and Evelyn immediately, sitting at table 3 like they owned the air around them. Martin's posture was rigid. Evelyn's smile was on, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the stage like she was looking for an exit. Brent sat at the table too, visibly tense, his shoulders hunched the way people hunch when they're pretending not to be afraid. Claire's chair was empty, which meant everyone would see her standing near the stage wing, watching. Thomas spoke into the microphone. Thank you, everyone. We're grateful for the partnership with the Wexler Foundation tonight. We've talked about innovation, but I want to emphasize something important. He paused, letting the room settle. At Meridian, we believe in credit where it belongs. The core mechanism behind Meridian Align wasn't generated by a committee or a marketing department. It was created by an independent inventor who spent years refining it. He looked toward me. Daniel Holt, would you join me? My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, but I moved anyway, stepping forward into the brightest part of the lights. The screens behind us shifted again. The glossy product render appeared on one side. On the other, the official record screenshot returned. USPTO header. My name in black type. A low murmur swept through the ballroom like wind through tall grass. Thomas continued. Daniel is the named inventor on the patent application for the core assembly. Meridian has licensed the technology under an executed licensing agreement with Daniel directly. Directly. The word landed. I saw Martin's jaw tighten from across the room. Evelyn's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she forced it back into place. Thomas wasn't done, and to avoid confusion, he added, voice measured, the royalty structure is set contractually and administered through Meridian's licensing department. Payments are remitted to Daniel as inventor under the agreement. He gave a small nod toward the host, signaling the point had been made. It felt like watching a door close, not slammed, not dramatic, just firmly shut. The host stepped forward with a big smile, as if this were the feel-good moment everyone came for. Daniel, he said, congratulations, that is incredible. Do you want to say a few words? 100 faces watched me, waiting for the right kind of humble, the right kind of inspiring. A neat story with a neat ending. My hands were steady at my sides. My voice, when it came out, surprised even me with how calm it sounded. Thank you, I said into the microphone. I appreciate it. I didn't come here tonight expecting to be on this stage. A ripple of laughter. Soft, friendly. I looked out over the room, letting my gaze pass over tables, suits, dresses, the careful wealth. I didn't have to say their names. I didn't have to point at Martin and Evelyn. But I did let my eyes land on them for one beat longer than necessary. And I know a lot of you have probably heard the word unemployed used like it means doing nothing. I said. For me, it meant I finally had the time to build something I'd been carrying in my head for years. The room grew quieter. Even the servers paused at the edges like they didn't want to miss what came next. I'm not saying that to make this sound dramatic, I added. I'm saying it because sometimes the work just isn't visible until it's done. I felt my throat tighten, but I held it. I'm grateful to Meridian for licensing it fairly, and I'm grateful to my wife for believing in me on the days I didn't. From the side of the stage, I saw Claire lift a hand to her mouth. Her eyes were shining, but her chin was high. I handed the microphone back to the host before I could say anything else that might turn into a speech. The host clapped enthusiastically. Beautifully said. Congratulations again. Applause swelled, full and loud. I didn't smile wide. I just nodded once and stepped back as Thomas thanked the crowd and exited. When I walked off stage, my knees finally threatened to go weak. The lights behind the curtain dimmed and the air felt cooler back here, less performative. Claire rushed to me the moment I cleared the curtain. She wrapped her arms around me, fast and tight, like she'd been holding herself together with wire and finally got permission to fall apart. You did it, she whispered. I exhaled, shaky. I just told the truth. That's what they can't stand, she said quietly. We walked back into the ballroom through the side entrance, and that's when the second wave hit. People. Not a mob, but a constant stream of hands and smiles and introductions. Daniel. Incredible work. Daniel, I'd love to talk about applications for our plants. Daniel, my brother is in manufacturing. Can I connect you? It was dizzying, and honestly it felt a little gross. Not because the interest was wrong, but because the timing was. Where were these people when I was just the quiet guy behind Claire? Still, I answered politely, kept it brief, nodded, thanked them, accepted business cards that I knew I might never call. Claire stayed beside me the whole time, her presence acting like a filter. If someone's attention got too eager, she redirected. If someone tried to talk around me to her parents, she stepped in. Then Martin stood. He didn't approach casually. He approached with purpose, like a man walking toward a negotiation table. Evelyn followed half a step behind, expression smooth, eyes sharp. They reached us near the edge of the dance floor area where the auction items had been displayed. Martin's voice was low and controlled. Daniel, Claire, we need a word. Claire's posture stiffened. Now. Martin's gaze flicked around, aware of nearby ears. Privately, Evelyn smiled. Too bright. Just family matters. I didn't move. Say it here. Evelyn's smile twitched. Daniel, don't be difficult. I looked at her. That's funny. You've been calling me incompetent for months, but now I'm difficult. Martin's eyes hardened. Watch your tone. Claire stepped forward. No, you watch yours. You don't get to threaten him. Evelyn's voice dropped, soft and urgent. Claire, we are trying to protect you. From what? Claire snapped. From the fact that my husband is more accomplished than you assumed. A few people nearby went quiet, pretending not to listen. Martin inhaled through his nose, recalibrating. This doesn't need to be emotional. Daniel, we simply need to understand the financial situation now. Claire is our daughter. We advise her. I felt the old urge to smooth it over, to de-escalate, to make it easier for Claire. That instinct had kept things civil for years, but civil had always meant I swallowed my dignity to keep their comfort intact. So I said the cleanest truth I had. The financial situation is simple, I replied. The patent is mine. The license is mine. The royalties are paid to me under contract. Claire and I will decide what we do with our household, and we won't be discussing it with you. Evelyn's face tightened. That's an extremely selfish attitude. Claire let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Selfish. You treated him like he was nothing. You tried to push me toward Brent at my own table. Evelyn's eyes flashed. That is absurd. Brent, who had been hovering nearby like he wanted to disappear into the carpet, suddenly spoke up. Evelyn, please. Claire turned toward him. No, you don't get to please your way out of this. You texted Daniel telling him not to make my parents look bad. Brent's face drained. I was trying to help. Help who? I asked calmly. Because it wasn't Claire. And it wasn't me. Martin's voice sharpened. Brent, step away. Brent did immediately. Evelyn's smile came back, thin as paper. Daniel, You're letting pride control you. This is new money, and it can—" I cut in. "Stop." Evelyn blinked. She wasn't used to being stopped. "I'm not being proud," I said. "I'm being clear. You don't get access to me because you finally decided I'm worth something." For a moment, Evelyn looked genuinely stunned, like her brain couldn't compute a world where she didn't get to set the terms. Martin's eyes narrowed. "So you're going to alienate your wife from her family?" Claire's voice turned ice cold. "You did that. Not him." Silence stretched. The kind of silence where people pretend to sip drinks so they can keep listening. Evelyn lowered her voice into something pleading, but it wasn't for me. It was for control. "Claire, think about what you're doing." Claire stepped closer to her mother. I'm thinking about the last 6 months. About every time you called him unemployed like it meant he was useless. About the way you smiled at strangers and cut him down in private." Evelyn's eyes flickered. "We were worried." Claire shook her head. "No, you were embarrassed." Martin opened his mouth again, but I didn't let him regain the rhythm. "I'm not asking you to like me," I said. "I'm not asking for approval. But here's what will happen from now on." Martin stared at me, jaw tight. "You will speak to me respectfully," I continued, "or you won't speak to me at all. You will not discuss my income like it's family property. You will not set Claire up with anyone, and you will not use her charity events as a stage to humiliate me again." Evelyn's eyes widened slightly at the word again. "And if you can't do that," I finished, "we will leave early, every time, and eventually we'll stop coming." The threat wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Because the thing Martin and Evelyn valued most wasn't money. It was access. Access to their daughter's life. Access to the image of family unity. Access to a narrative where they were always the respectable center. And I was telling them I could shut that door. Martin's face hardened into stone. "You're making a mistake." Claire's voice softened, but it didn't weaken. "No, Dad. We're correcting one." Evelyn's eyes flashed with anger. Real anger now, no mask. But then she looked around and saw eyes, donors, friends, people who would talk, people who had just watched the unemployed son-in-law stand on stage with his name on a federal record. She swallowed her expression. Her smile returned. "Of course," she said. "We'll discuss this another time." And in that moment I understood something that made me sad more than satisfied. They weren't changing. They were managing. Martin turned away first, as if ending the conversation made him the authority again. Evelyn followed, her posture perfect. Claire exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding her breath for years. I looked at her. "You okay?" She nodded, eyes wet. "I am now." We stayed for another half hour, long enough to thank a few people who spoke to us with genuine kindness, long enough for Claire to make 1 or 2 diplomatic rounds so she didn't feel like she'd abandoned the event. Then, exactly as she'd promised earlier, we went home. In the car, the silence felt different than on the drive-in. Not tense, clean. Claire stared out the window for a while, then said quietly, "I hated them tonight." I didn't respond with the usual smoothing words. I didn't say, "They mean well." I didn't say, "They'll come around." I just said, "I know." Claire turned her head and looked at me. "And I'm sorry I ever made you go into their rooms alone." "You didn't," I said. "I chose it too. I kept thinking if I stayed polite long enough, they'd respect me." Claire's voice broke slightly. "They didn't deserve that." I kept my eyes on the road. "No, but you did." When we got home, we changed out of our gala clothes like we were shedding a skin. Claire took off her earrings and set them on the dresser with careful hands. I hung up my tux jacket and stared at it for a long moment, like it belonged to a stranger. Then we sat on the couch in sweats, the house quiet around us, and Claire finally asked the question she'd been holding back all night. "Tell me everything," she said, "from the beginning." So I did. I told her about the first sketches in my old notebooks, about the long nights modeling the mechanism, about the stress tests that kept failing until I moved the notch placement and reinforced the arm, about Marissa, about the filing date, about the licensing consultant, about the negotiation calls where I'd had to pretend I was confident while my stomach twisted the whole time. Claire listened without interrupting. She didn't get angry that I hadn't told her sooner. She just looked at me like she was seeing the full shape of the fight I'd been in. When I finished, she reached for my hand and said, "I'm proud of you." I nodded once. "Thank you." "And," she added, voice steadier now, "we're going to protect this. Protect you. We're not letting them make it dirty." I squeezed her hand. Agreed. Later that night, after Claire fell asleep, I opened my laptop and pulled up the executed licensing agreement again. Not because I needed reassurance, but because I needed to remember what was real. Not the gala, not the whispers, not Martin's face on the stage lights. The real thing was the work, the record, the signature, the structure that couldn't be smirked away. And I thought about the version of myself from 6 months ago, sitting in my car after the layoff, staring at the steering wheel like it might tell me what to do next. That man had felt small, not because he lacked ability, but because other people had taught him that his worth only existed when it was visible to them. If there was one lesson I took from that night, it wasn't success is the best revenge. It was simpler than that. Some people don't respect effort. They respect outcomes. And if you build your identity around their approval, you'll spend your life trying to earn a seat at a table that moves the moment you reach for it. The only real leverage I gained wasn't the patent. It was the decision to stop asking permission to be valued.